Siti Binti Saad, Mselem House, and the voice of a new anti-colonial taarab tradition. This presentation centers on how the legendary taarab singer Siti Binti Saad, 1880 to 1950, developed the philosophical craft of music making for social justice. I argue herein that Saad's work produced anti-positivist spaces. Her lyrics reconfigured power relations underpinned by dominant Eurocentric narratives. As a counterstory, this presentation explores how Saad embedded in her work vivid phenomenological scenes and the rhetorical construct of counter-argument. It gives special treatment to Saad's public frustrations with wealthy Zanzibarian businessmen, colonial administrators, and landlords in her song, Wala Hapana Hasara. We will explore the reasons for which her lyrics held covert expressions towards the ruling classes. Saad's lyrics, moreover, lent themselves to philosophical critiques of the semiotic spaces of patriarchal power. And with this understanding of her anti-colonial ideas and context, of the people and places of early 20th century Zanzibar, Tanzania, we might better appreciate them as a palpable contribution to knowledge beyond the Western philosophical canon. To this end, this presentation unpacks the life experiences that Saad embedded within the song Wala Hapana Hasara to demonstrate how they shape and reflect collective memory and critical appreciation of place. Through her anti-colonial songcraft, I argue, Saad was amongst the various womanist philosophers who set the groundwork for decolonial feminism. In other words, Saad's Wala Hapana Hasara courageously challenged the colonial modern gender system, or the oppressive structures of global capitalism that for 500 years destroyed communities, their cosmologies, and the planet. Over the past few decades, scholars have made much of Siti Binti Saad's legacy. Saad had little impact on public life and public figures, some say. Others remember her as a powerful cultural force, as a voice of human liberation. Yet it was one affiliated to an exploitive global commercial enterprise, the music industry. Her work, some argue, advanced nefarious gender norms and the cultural tyranny of modern nationalism. These claims sometimes overlook the complexities of her life. For Saad opens Wala Hapana Hasara with a line that frames her humble origins and life as an outsider. There is no lineage, I do not belong. Here, Saad is ostensibly taking an ethical stance. For if we turn to her life story, we find that embedded within this declaration are vivid phenomenological scenes of the daily struggles of the common Zanzibarian woman during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In the romantically styled hagiography of her life, the Tanzanian national poet Shaban Robert noted that Saad's earliest memories were of a life of bitter hardship and extreme poverty. She grew up in the small rural seaside village of Fumba on the southern end of the island of Ngunja. Saad was born there sometime in the early 1880s to enslaved and illiterate parents. Mother's name was Kukini. She was a potter who hawked her earthen cooking wares in Zanzibar city's streets and markets. Saad's father was called Kumini. His life centered around a nearby plantation. Around 3/4 of the population of Zanzibar Island were enslaved at this time. While women like Kukini toiled as a domestic servant, Kumini labored on clove and later coconut plantations, the shamba. These cash crops began to appear alongside the establishment of the Omani Zanzibar Sultanate from 1810 to 1840. During this period, the British East India Company pressured Omani Sultan Said 1806 to 56, to exert control over the Zanzibar archipelago. By 1832, Zanzibar was the epitome of trade and enslaved peoples and goods across East Africa and the West Indian Ocean. Said formalized the occupation in 1840 when he moved his government from Muscat, Oman to Stone Town, Ungunja. Under his reign, scores of Arab colonialists came to Zanzibar. They forced indigenous Africans to give up their lands and imported dhows crammed full of enslaved people from the mainland to work the shamba. Said's son and successor, Barghash bin Said al-Busaidi, gathered his wealth and constructed in 1883 a towering palace called the House of Wonders on the western shores of Stone Town. Among other modern features, local legend said it was here that the first all-male taarab groups performed on the island. Saad, meanwhile, spent her childhood singing and playing in the fields and helping Mother Kukini around the homestead. She eventually made the hours-long walk with Kukini from Fumba into Stone Town. It was in this space, the half-day walk into town, that Saad passed her time in song as she carried stacks of Kukini's earthen wares on her head to town to hawk at the market. As she meandered through Stone Town, barefoot in two thread-like tunics, her melodic chants advertising Kukini's wares echoed off its labyrinthian, Coraline streetscape. From within these reverberant channels that form Stone Town's streets and structures, Saad would eventually launch her famous career as singer, anti-colonialist, and womanist philosopher. That opportunity opened to her during her late teens. After the shortest war in history, the British installed for purely economic reasons a proponent of the abolition of enslavement across Zanzibar in one Sultan Hamoud ibn Muhammad. In 1897, the Sultan signed an abolition decree that emancipated enslaved peoples across Zanzibar, albeit only if they could prove they were self-supporting with a place to live. Thus, it would take several decades for thousands of people to step beyond their state of social dependency to stake their claim to humanity. The first line of Wala Hapana Hasara on Saad's local humble origins speaks to this settler colonial context. What follows is a more poetic line, stating, "The word is like a blow, burns in the chest." Perhaps this line is meant to convey that Saad's early childhood experiences rendered her painfully aware of her status as subject to the colonial modern gender system. Although known today by her forename Siti, Saad was actually known as Mtumwa, or slave, for the first 3 decades of her life. And it was assumed that Fumba women like Saad would simply marry, bear children, make pots, draw water, and cook for her husband and children, grow old, and die. Yet this kind of stock story erases Zanzibarian women's contributions to public and skilled labor, which is a form of epistemic violence. Along this vein, the opening lines of Wala Hapana Hasara offer the rhetorical construct of counter-argument that challenges such stock stories. After Saad married a local man named Rajab, she found herself pushing against the rigid traditions foisted upon her and other Fumba women. So much did she reject Rajab's attempts to control her that Saad quit him and the town altogether in February 1910, taking their young daughter Maryam with her. Siti Binti Saad moved into an area of Zanzibar city east of Old Stone Town proper. It was known as Ngombo. Saad was familiar with Ngombo, having passed through it to sell Kukini's wares at the Darajani Estrella Market, among other sites in Stone Town. Ngombo was on the other side of a tidal creek that foreigners described as a fetid lagoon. In what Gedesian Garden City-inspired colonizers would call a cordon sanitaire during the British Protectorate. In other words, it was a natural barrier used to segregate African and immigrant peoples living in Ngombo huts from the old formal, whitewashed, core-lined buildings inhabited by wealthy Arab, Asian, and European colonial aristocrats in Stone Town proper. In Ngombo, one could find an informal collage of thatched-roofed, wattle and daub structures along hardened earthen streets. This material culture was the work of escaped and manumitted enslaved peoples who had lived there for decades. Not unlike Franz Fanon's depiction of colonial cities as Manichaean or dualistic, Stone Town and the other side were geographically, demographically, politically, economically, and culturally distinct. Thousands of people saw Ngombo as offering a more fluid social structure for a variety of types of casual labor than life in Stone Town proper. Ngombo's population, in fact, doubled between the 1890s and 1930s. Saad was among thousands of formerly enslaved peoples who abandoned rural plantations for town life during this time. Saad would increasingly stake her claim to humanity, to live according to her own narrative. The second line of Wala Hapana Hasara reflects this framing. "It must burn like a heavy blow to the chest," she sings. These are the thoughts of an immigrant formerly enslaved single mother. Saad conveys a storm of physical pain, perhaps from being hit by something or someone, or from suffering a broken heart. It would appear, in fact, that Saad is challenging her oppressors, for her next line is, "The name is yours, my man, and the rock is on your head, and the rock is on your head." While the previous line communicates the physical pain that Saad experienced growing up enslaved, the third line shifts that pain to a patriarchal figure. It is a reference to Mselem bin Muhammad el-Khalisi. Saad became familiar with this landlord while a renter in Ngombo. In fact, Saad's life intertwined with many people there. Perhaps the most important person she had met in Ngombo was Mushin Ali. A founding member of the taarab orchestra Nadi Ikwani Safa, Ali's was the first taarab group in Stone Town in East Africa more broadly to play taarab. Ali's band performed at the Sultan's House of Wonders since 1905. A talented oud player, Shia Muslim, Ali heard and thoroughly appreciated Saad's rare talents. He invited her to devotional performances of the Quran and encouraged her to become a reciter. Although Saad was illiterate, her ambition and talent proved an ample substitute. A quick memory and a devotion to articulating Arabic rhythmically in rich idiom enabled Saad to emerge as a voice of liberation. Working with Ali and other talented musicians, Saad learned to employ her melodious voice to recite the Quran with a tone and timbre that inspired deep reverence. She practiced the tajwid. This rigorous system of rules enabled her to precisely and beautifully articulate phonetics, to assimilate juxtaposed consonants, and to relay the proper rhythmic duration of vowels. Tajwid may have even regulated Saad's improvisational and repeated emphasis on certain words and phrases for dynamic tension in Wala Hapana Hasara. The teachings of the Quran also likely informed the song. "Cease your oppression and plundering the poor," she sings. It comes from a place of ethical conviction. Saad sings this song as a representative of the Ngombo community. For the colonial administrative system created and reinforced inequalities on the positivistic basis of race, caste, class, and gender. Saad's singing career suffered and then thrived within this context. Increasingly, she was called on to perform at venues of a religious nature. For these performances, Saad surrounded herself with a group of the most talented musicians. In Ngombo, Saad opened a taarab club where she lived, practiced, and performed with her bandmates. Here the group played with great frequency. They feminized and proletarianized taarab. By mixing Arabic and Kiswahili vocals in songwriting, Saad's magnetic voice attracted here a diverse community of followers. No longer was she Siti Binti Saad. For some 3.5 decades of performances, she took on the persona Siti Binti Saad, Siti being the Arabic word for lady. While word of her past spread, community critics and elitists mocked her taarab dreams. Yet during the monsoon seasons, dhows plied across the waters from Kuwait, Iraq, Oman, and Yemen to Stone Town, and Saad was fully booked to entertain them all. No longer, then, was taarab music strictly made by men for aloof elites. Saad carried taarab from exclusive palaces to the docks, streets, and clubs, but by the early 1930s, she had earned enough wealth to live a grand, ostentatious life. Yet her lyrics would continue to offer a philosophical voice of everyday resistance for working-class East African coastal womanists. There was something joyful about this newfound communal resistance gathering around together, collectivizing outside the dominant structures of society. As taarab groups formed across the island, women controlled all aspects of this genre during the period. They coordinated uniforms and organized picnics and feasts, where they joined in rich discussion that lent itself to the craft of song. In this manner, Saad engaged in intense local taarab rivalries in which opposing groups would diss each other, as well as their social and political oppressors. Saad's taarab club was an enclave of a particular kind of demographic, one similar to herself. African womanists from Ngambo who were young, gifted, collectivist, and black. Moreover, they were chiefly single, divorced, and or widowed women. They were free from the demands of the stereotypical Zanzibari man. Song and discussion, music and lyrics grew organically, each night, over time, at Saad's taarab performances. Her songs were communal, oral stories, living documents. They addressed the joys of motherhood, love, and relationships, and at times the sorrows of living within a colonial, patriarchal, misogynist, racist, Eurocentric, and positivist society. We accordingly find in her songs some covert expressions towards the ruling classes. We see critiques of the semiotic spaces of power, such as the British colonial courts that upheld laws in favor of local elites. Walla Hapana Hasara is one such song, for the next lines speak to these themes. She sings, "Especially those fools who do not speak, the fools among fools. Their pen is always ink on their fingers. It is ink." Saad and others of the Ngambo African community felt excluded. It was as if colonial elites kept them ignorant and politically obstructed. The reference to fools and fingers in Walla Hapana Hasara relays how during the 1920s and 1930s, illiteracy amongst the Ngambo peoples enabled colonial administrators and Asian and Arab property owners to defraud the community. For it was the non-illiterate who used their thumbprints if obliged to certify a legal document with ink, which they could neither interpret nor negotiate. Along these lines, tension in Ngambo peaked during the 1928-9 ground rent strike. Here, locals who lived in Zanzibar City's other side organized a boycott of payments to their landlords. This event intersected with Mselem bin Muhammad el-Khalisi, who is the man with a rock on his head in Walla Hapana Hasara. A wealthy civil servant, he was the Secretary General of the government of Unguja during the reign of Khalifa bin Harub of Zanzibar, holding great influence over the land and administration of things across the whole of Unguja, barring Old Stone Town proper. Mselem was widely despised for exploiting the poor. With his power, he bribed locals. With taxpayer money, he funded lavish parties. And he built an imposing multi-story house in Ngambo. It served as his reconnaissance outlook tower while he worked as a government informant during the rent strike. To this end, Walla Hapana Hasara offers a voice pointed directly at investigating disreputable clerks like Mselem. Saad sings, Is it not wrong stealing from the government? Their ledgers lie open with each and every signature. Something from years ago can always be investigated. Can always be investigated, she sings. If this song was like many others, a living document that evolved at Saad's Taarab Club, then this verse emerged sometime after Mselem was a known predator and informant. Walla Hapana Hasara may have been at some point a popular call for an official investigation into Mselem sometime during Ngambo's 1928 rent strike. During the monsoon season that spring, Saad and her bandmates voyaged across the Arabian Sea to Mumbai, Bombay, for their first recording sessions. Executives from the global record label His Master's Voice had discovered them. The local anthem Walla Hapana Hasara was too unsavory to ever record, it seems. The lyrics to the song, published in the 1960s, include a fourth verse that warns clerks about the government's investigation into Mselem, which occurred sometime after the rent strike. Saad sings, "My friends, do not be fooled. Hold fast. Take this warning and keep it close to your hearts. You clerks should be satisfied with your due, you clerks. With your due, you clerks." Mselem was convicted and imprisoned for embezzling money from government accounts. Many people in Ngambo saw this as vindication by God for the wrongs which he had committed against them. Mselem was sentenced to hard labor in the local rock quarry. Authorities stoned him and photographed him with a rock on his head, hence the opening lines of Walla Hapana Hasara. Women's clothing designers commemorated Saad's protest song. They produced a printed, colorful cotton fabric kanga that featured the picture and words Mselem's rock. Meanwhile, Saad's band became the first East African musicians to record on 78 RPM gramophone discs. Hers was the first East African voice to be heard across the world. The band's music was thereafter in great demand in India, then they toured in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanganyika. Between 1829 and 1930, Saad recorded over 250 songs, chiefly with the same musicians. Saad influenced scores of musicians. She has been the subject of multiple biographies, international forums, womanist magazines, and a fictional drama. Yet today, there are no public monuments dedicated to her name and memory. Members of the local Zanzibarian Taarab community are not sure exactly where Saad's home and Taarab club once stood. Yet people in the community remember the imposing house from which Mselem lorded over them. Despite her misgivings, Saad co-created songs about the confrontation of virtue versus fortune and corruption. This is an enduring contest in all communities to this day, and Walla Hapana Hasara is a clear place, I think, in which she applied her philosophical, cultural capital to critique the colonial modern gender system.
Hapana nasaba mimi uladi fulani neno kama daruba launguza kifuani jina lake wewe baba na jiwe liko kichwani na jiwe liko wacheni yenu dhuluma kunyang'anya masikini hasa wasiosema wajinga wa ujingani. Kalamu yao daima ni wino wa kidoleni, ni wino. Haifai udokozi kuiba, serikalini mabuku yao ya wazi moja moja la saini. Neno la mwaka juzi hungia pekesheni. kuingia pekesheni. Jamaa msihadaike, hayo yangu yashikeni. Tanbihi muiweke isiwatoke rohoni, kwa kidogo mtosheke. Haki